Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about political psychology and information processing, basically what's going on behind the scenes that then forms public opinion. It's going to be a little bit headier of a lecture than a lot of the stuff that we talked about already this semester, but it is, I think, a fun one because ideally it'll help you understand a little bit better what's going on in your head when you think about politics, and also help you understand what's going on in the head of someone who you're arguing with about politics, and maybe give them a little bit of grace. Let's talk about political psychology and information processing. So this lecture examines what I call, very hoity-toitily, the architecture of political thought. Basically, we're shifting from the structural patterns of public opinion, how public opinion operates in practice, into the cognitive and affective, as in with an A, processes that lead to those opinions being formed. Basically, political psychology explains why people might interpret identical information about politics differently. Why emotions that you feel about a certain thing can outweigh evidence that you're given, or why partisanship, as pervasive as it is in our institutions, actually pervades perception even. It's not just governing how Congress works, it's governing how your brain works too. We're going to focus on attention, information processing, emotion, and something called motivated reasoning that I'm going to define later, which is basically the building blocks of political cognition. So let's talk about those building blocks. Human cognition isn't a neutral thing that happens. You are not some ball of clay to be molded in any way. You have preconceived biases and habits and trends that are baked in to your brain. Citizens process only fragments of the political environment. Case in point, the news discussion that we just had. Big news doesn't break through anymore. And even when it did before, not everybody's going to pay attention, because maybe you want to go line dancing, or maybe you want to go home and just, like, I don't know, eat an empanada. I'm having empanadas for dinner tonight. I'm very excited. Attention is a scarce resource, and perception of reality depends on what information aligns with your prior beliefs, what you feel about something, as well as the cues you receive about that thing. Remember what I talked about last class. If you associate crime with immigration, that is going to condition how you think about both of those concepts. Those are cues. Political psychology views judgment as schema-based. Essentially, citizens like you interpret events through your stored knowledge, as well as party stereotypes, what you feel about the Democrats or the Republicans, policy frames, how certain policies have been talked about to you, as well as your moral values. We agreed in here, was a very hot take a few weeks ago, that killing people is wrong. Y'all remember that? That's an inherent moral value that you have. These schemas that we have simplify complexity, but they also create systematic distortions in how information is encoded, as in how you take the information you are experiencing and writing that onto your brain, as well as recalled, how you're recalling, pulling back that information out of the recesses of your cobweb-infested brain when you need to think about something or remember something. I think I'm running out of battery on this. Cognitive shortcuts, organized political meeting. That's what I just said. So, dual process theories are common in political science, and they distinguish intuitive and reflective models of reasoning. So we're going to explain the difference between these. So first you have system one. It operates automatically. It's driven by affect, habit, and heuristics. Affect, when I talk about this, is kind of pre-consciousness views of things that happen in the back of your mind. This is affect in heuristics, right? Someone asks someone else, would you like an apple? And instead of this person thinking about their glucose level, their caloric deficit, how good past apples they've eaten have been, the risk that their friend is trying to poison them, and rather they just think, I like apples, I'm going to eat an apple. System 2 engages in deliberate evaluation. That would be going through your glucose levels, your caloric deficit, your past apple ratings, and the risk that your friend might poison you. Because politics rarely commands sustained attention, everybody in politics has the memory of a goldfish. That's important to take away. Because politics rarely commands sustained attention, most citizens, they rely on System 1. I rely on System 1 most of the time. Guaranteed you guys rely on System 1 as well. Emotional responses, stereotypes, and partisan cues guide our judgments so we can do them quickly. System 2 only intervenes when motivation or cognitive resources are high. A situation where motivation might be high is, say you are about to have a debate that you know you're going to have with someone about politics. Say you're going home for Thanksgiving, and you know your dad, he just really, loves Joe Biden. And you're going home and you're like, I want to show that Joe Biden was in cognitive decline during his presidency, and I want to have it out with my dad, so I'm going to look up all of these things about it and have the evidence catalog so I can talk to him and be informed. That's high motivation. When you have high resources, that's like time. Not everybody has time to look up how Joe Biden developed dementia, right? That could take a lot of time. Understanding these two systems clarifies why well-intentioned citizens like you and me, I like to think that we're all well-intentioned, can hold contradictory or poorly integrated beliefs at the same time. You ever hear the idea that people vote against their own interests? That's like a very elitist way of not understanding cognitive processing and political thought. Most people just are not hardwired to instantly understand the ramifications of every political decision that they might make, mostly because they just don't have the information available to them. So someone might be like, hey, I'm pro-life and I support the death penalty. That might be contradictory to someone, but someone's affect, someone's values might disagree with that, right? Maybe their information about the policy is not complete. The scholarship shows that citizens aren't just passive receivers of information. They're actively seeking out what they want to pay attention to. And they usually prefer what I frame as congenial content, or that's content that confirms their existing beliefs, confirmatory information. We talked about echo chambers. That's what I'm speaking about here. This selective exposure reduces psychological discomfort that you might feel, but narrows informational diversity. So there is a certain psychological discomfort that everybody feels when they are given facts that don't align with their own values politically. You see this often, for instance, with low-income Trump voters, right? When you talk to them about oligarchy or billionaires and exploitative systems of labor and capitalism, particularly in relation to immigration, and you ask them, do you have more in common with an immigrant from Venezuela or Elon Musk? And you see them feel a certain level of cognitive dissonance sometimes. This is a very specific example, but this is commonly coming out of like 2016 to 2024 in rural Kentucky, Appalachia in West Virginia, as well as even coal country in Pennsylvania. When issues are complex or technical, many people just choose to disengage altogether. If it's too complicated, I'm not getting paid to pay attention to this, I don't need to do it for a grade, I'm not going to waste my time on it. Motivation, and think of that as both interest, a personal identity that you feel like you need to know things about, or even a threat that you perceive, that can all manifest motivation. So motivation drives whether people seek or avoid information. Hence, information flow in democracies like ours depends on as much on psychology as the supply of media. Now, this figure that I should have definitely made larger shows clusters of who's paying attention to what media. I think it's a little outdated, but you can see that this web here has certain larger clusters along ideologies, and if you zoomed in on this, you would see that there is very little integration between the blue sphere and the red sphere. Citizens rarely can recall facts verbatim. Think about this like you're leaving class. You're not going to remember word for word what I said in my lecture, despite my ardent desire for you guys to parrot all of my talking points out in the world. Memory reconstructs stimuli rather than records it exactly. So your memories are a model of what you experienced, not the actual thing. Unless you have perfect recall, then please, I'm so jealous of you. When recalling information, individuals integrate fragments consistent with their worldview, and this often can distort chronology, when events happen, as well as causality, what actually happened. So your priors that are already up here, remember you're not just a blank slab of clay, are going to distort how your memory forms. What's going on up here is not the truth, I'm sorry to tell you. Recency and emotional salience determine which cues dominate recall. Think about this in terms of trauma response, right? If you get shot in the arm, that's probably going to be a pretty impactful memory for you, versus if, some dickhead at a bar decides to punch you in the shoulder. Maybe that's a fun story for a little while, but being shot is going to stick with you more. That's more emotionally salient, particularly if you just got shot in the arm. That's recency. Over time, misinformation can be re-encoded as truth when repeated within trusted networks. So if you are believing some lie, and you're got a shaky grasp on it, and you are operating within spheres of people who also believe that lie, and also parrot that lie, then you are more likely to think that that lie is in fact truth, even if initially you believed that that lie was in fact a lie. Think about this in terms of conspiracy theories. If I tell you that the earth is hollow, and I believe that the earth is hollow, and then I go to a hollow earth convention where there are a bunch of other people walking around and saying that the earth is hollow, I'm more likely to believe that the earth is hollow in fact, and my 9th grade earth science teacher, Mr. Crick, was lying to me. That bastard. Memory processes then sustain beliefs, even when corrections are offered. So memory is kind of like a disease then. Once it's in there, it's really hard to change and get out. I love this image on here. So affect, remember these pre-consciousness ideas about things. Affect isn't actually the enemy of reason, right? I've given you a very bleak view of how we think about politics so far, but it's not mutually exclusive from how we think about rationality and reason. Rather, affect is a prerequisite for reason. We just have to remove how we judgmentally think about reason. Reason isn't this perfect thing like Aristotle walking around in a toga being like, oh yes, I've reasoned through this and philosophically thought about it with evidence and blah, 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 blah. Reason is just another cognitive process. Emotions signal relevance of stimuli and direct attention towards or away from that stimuli. So let's talk about certain forms of emotion. For example, fear heightens vigilance, pushing citizens possibly to seek new information. If you are afraid of something, humans have this thing that they do where they want to know all about it. You're watching a horror movie and there's clearly something scary in the dark door over there and you're like, don't go towards that dark door, but they go there anyway. Chances are, let's be honest, you guys won't be the kind to run the other direction because you guys are all curious individuals. I know you guys are. Enthusiasm can maintain political engagement. You want your supporters to be enthusiastic about you. And anger encourages blame and participation. Great example of this, Trump voters particularly poor ones, were very understandably angry in 2016. His populist rhetoric glommed on because the neoliberal world order of the late 90s, think NAFTA, left them behind, gave their jobs away to other people and left them in poverty. And so they were very angry. And so they're going to go out and they're going to participate by voting. The affective intelligence framework, which is what this is, emphasizes that distinct emotions trigger different cognitive strategies. Basically, different emotions that you feel, different feelings, can trigger different processes in your head. Thus, the emotional tone that a campaign or a politician seeks to evoke can directly structure how citizens process information about politics. Motivated reasoning. Motivated reasoning describes the tendency to evaluate information in ways that protects identity and pre-existing attitudes. So, you have an identity. Maybe that is a USC college student. This is a great example, actually. You are a USC college student, and you're coming in as a freshman or whatever, and you're riding the high. Last year we did pretty good in terms of football. You're like, USC is an up-and-coming SEC school. Our football program is pretty good. And then you come here, and we start losing games. And maybe there's a little bit of copium that you guys huff. Initially, not anymore. Everybody just wants the season to be over. But initially, you're like, oh, well, maybe we just had a bad game. Maybe, Sellers will get back on it and whatever. And, I don't want to think that maybe our team is not good because, I spend a lot of money to be here. And Beamer's salary is so much money. If we're paying him that much, we should be winning, right? Also, did you guys see that Penn State fired James Franklin after, 12 years? That's crazy, man. Someday I'll tell you about my mom getting her PhD and shaking James Franklin's hand and how happy that made her. But motivated reasoning. You are motivated based on your pre-existing beliefs about something to maybe not believe the truth. When citizens, like you, encounter discomforting facts, they often engage in counter-arguing in their head or reinterpretation to preserve consistency. So you hear something that challenges your belief, whether that's, maybe you hate immigrants or something, and you hear a story about an immigrant being a really active member of their church and really good in the community and helping out with food banks and stuff like that. That might prompt you to do some motivated reasoning where you're like, well, maybe they're just doing that to manipulate us into thinking that they're good people. I just painted a really racist person in my head. I'm sorry, guys. However, accuracy motivation can exist with bias. We're going to talk about accuracy motivation in a few slides. Basically, it is your motivation to be accurate in the facts that you believe. But directional goals, that's basically wanting to be right in line with one's own group, usually dominates. So directional goals are basically, I want to be right, and I want the rightness to align with what I already think. I'm not wasting money at this college paying Beamer's salary. That would be counter-arguing in your own head. The result is this thing called belief polarization, which is exposure to the same facts, the fact that exposure to the same facts can push partisans further apart rather than close together. It's kind of like, nuh-uh, what about you kind of situation. Does motivated reasoning make sense to you guys? You're motivated to think about things in a way that you already believe. Political psychology talks about multiple forms of recurring bias that influence how we evaluate things. Let's talk about a few of them. Confirmation bias sustains echo chambers. You are seeking out evidence that already confirms what you believe. It's kind of like motivated reasoning. Think about this in concrete terms. You believe that vaccines cause autism. And so you sift through studies and studies and studies, 20 years of them, in fact, that show that vaccines do not, in fact, cause autism until you find the original study from 2001 that says that it does. And you say, I have scientific evidence to back me up. That is confirmation bias. Availability bias explains why isolated events reshape opinion disproportionately. That could be terror attacks or scandals. After 9/11, everybody got real Islamophobic real fast because of 9/11. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, it's going to happen to us again. Anchoring effects occur when initial impressions, such as a candidate's image, set enduring baselines for evaluation. If a candidate for office gets up on stage to announce their candidacy and promptly shits themselves, they're not going to live that down. That's going to probably paint your picture of them for the future. They're going to be, potential candidate, I don't know. I was going to think of a pun there, but it escaped me. Lastly, negativity bias reflects the evolutionary primacy of threat detection. I was being very lofty when I wrote these notes. Basically, it accesses this kind of primal thing that we have within us to glom on to negative things more than positive things. And that's from threat detection. We're going to focus on the bad more than we focus on the good. Partisanship, how closely you align with a party, functions as a powerful social identity in America. People are really attracted or attached to whether or not they are a Republican or a Democrat. Citizens experience political disagreement not just as a difference of opinion, but as a threat to the in-group. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but you can experience this in real time if you are the only Democrat hanging out with a bunch of Republicans, or the only Republican hanging out with a bunch of Democrats. You will feel threat to your own identity, even if they're not talking about politics necessarily, just by knowing what their political orientation is. The research also shows that effective attachment to one's party shapes perceptions of fairness, competence, and even factual reality. This goes beyond echo chambers. This goes beyond media bubbles. Just because someone has an R or a D next to their name on the ballot box, this might actually inform how you see them, even if you know a bunch of other stuff about them, right? You might know, oh, he's a family man, he's a good guy, he's advocating for this, and this, but he's a Democrat, so, he's a piece of shit in my head. This identity defense explains these persistent misperceptions and even hostility that exists across party lines. Basically, what we have here is a figure of feeling thermometers. 0 to 100, how do you feel about these people? 100 being, I like these people. 0 being, these people are lower than dirt. And we have the blue lines here are Democrats rating in the solid line themselves, and in the dotted line, the Republicans rating the Democrats, and vice versa with these. And you can see we are experiencing a widening gap between how parties perceive the other party versus how they perceive themselves. There is more self-hatred happening as well, so, it's not all bad news. People do hate themselves as well as hate other people more. It's just equal opportunity hatred. Does effective polarization make sense to people? Individuals rarely process political stimuli or go through reasoning in isolation. Social context exerts a powerful influence over how they feel about these things and think about them. Conformity pressures, that's a desire for belonging in a group. You want to be cool. Fear of social sanction. If you are not cool and not saying the right things, maybe people won't eat lunch with you anymore. Those conformity pressures, they shape expression and, over time, belief. If you act like something long enough because you're stressed that if you don't, you're not going to be cool, you're going to become that thing eventually, even in politics. Persuasion depends not just on message quality, but also on the social credibility and group endorsement of its source. For example, trusted individuals saying something about politics can override otherwise factual content from an expert source. So if I'm up here, and all of this is informed by the literature, and I'm talking about politics with you guys, and you decide that I'm full of horse shit, even though, I'm an expert on this, because Rachel Maddow said something else, that's what's happening there. Network dynamics then mediate information processing. Ideas can spread or stay where they are, depending almost exclusively sometimes on the trust that people have with the source of that fact, as well as the perceived alignment of the source of that fact. If a Democrat is talking to a Republican and says something that Republican happens to agree with, they are less likely to trust that thing, even if they already agree with it, just because the source is a Democrat, and vice versa. In contemporary media environments, people face perpetual information streams. There's so much going on at once. At the same time, your capacity for cognition can't process all of this stimuli. And basically, it forces you to simplify things and rely on those heuristics that we talked about before, these shortcuts. At worst, overload of information can lead to disengagement with the facts and potentially even cynical avoidance of what's happening. We see this a lot now. People have been told they can vote their way out of their situation for so many years, and people are tired of hearing it. Emotional exhaustion is what's happening there, and it diminishes the will to evaluate competing claims. And that reinforces our reliance on identity cues and these mental shortcuts. And this kind of links this technological advancement of the media with cognitive strain. It is harder to just be a person thinking about things now than it used to be. But not all reasoning is defensive. You're not always on the defense. Under certain conditions, citizens can pursue accuracy goals. They want to be accurate. Those conditions are potentially when there's accountability involved, right? They want their government to be accountable. They want to be accountable to other people. They need to be accountable to other people. Personal relevance. It's really important to you that you get this fact right. Or when deliberative norms are high. You're in a group of people who will call you on your bullshit, so you need to actually be accurate. You can't just finagle your way around it. These conditions involve active evaluation of evidence and openness to information that disagrees with you. Accuracy motivation depends on cognitive resources as well as situational incentives. Institutional features such as debate forums, diverse media exposure, and deliberative polling can enhance accuracy by reducing psychological and informational asymmetries. Basically, having a forum where there is a judgment-free ability to ask questions and talk about ideas, and I'm not talking about the court of public debate or the court of public idea. There are bad ideas. Diverse media exposure, being able to hear from differing viewpoints. Again, some views are wrong. And deliberative polling is basically the idea that we're going to actually see what the public wants by giving them a lot of options and giving them open-ended responses. Political psychology then shows us that citizens aren't fully rational, but they're not fully irrational. And they're not hopelessly ignorant. Yay! Their reasoning is bounded to a few things, to systemic forces, to emotional ones, to their identity. But because we know that it's bounded to those things, we can understand people's reasoning. Recognizing these predictable biases allows democratic systems then to design interventions that align with human cognition. That could be clear information environments, making sure that news about policy is accurate and getting out to people. Accountability incentives, you give inspectors general all the money. And opportunities for deliberation. That could be between a citizen and their elected representative in a town hall, or also just talking about issues amongst ourselves. The task isn't to make citizens perfect reasoners, despite what political scientists might want to do, despite how much we might rip our hair out at the fact that people don't know things and don't want to know things, but to make institutions work with rather than against human psychology. So let's talk about some takeaways here. I know this is an old meme at this point, but I couldn't think of a picture to put on this slide, and I try to be even-keeled by making fun of both Democrats and Republicans. So here is meme of blue-haired leftists screaming. Political psychology and information processing explain how public opinion forms. Citizens process politics through things like emotion and identity as much as they process information through traditional conceptions of reasoning. We're going to talk about that a little bit more next week. Motivated reasoning, selective attention, and effective bias structure political life, but these aren't necessarily flaws. They're features of human cognition that we can work around. Studying these helps us understand polarization, persuasion, and effective democratic governance over time, guiding us to a more realistic form of citizen competence.